Hey everyone, it's Graham here from the recordingrevolution.com. Got a cool sort of mental exercise for you that might help you when you're mixing, help you think about what you're trying to do in a mix and maybe where you get stuck. If you've ever mixed and you just feel like all your tracks sound together and glued in a bad way, they're all just like crowded together. Everything's muddy. There's not a lot of separation, and it might sound good because your ears get used to it. And then you listen to a pro mix and reference a pro mix, and the difference is extreme. You hear in the pro mix that the song is jumping out of the speakers. It seems wider. It seems the bass is low and fat, and the highs are soaring above the speakers, and everything just seems to have more depth and clarity. And I get that we have that issue a lot in the home studio. I hear people talk about that a lot. I have experienced that a lot. And a lot of the tips I give you might help you along the way. But here's maybe a different way to look at the problem and then maybe to look at the solution. I want to talk about not crowding the box. And the box in particular, I'm talking about the box, imaginary box that you're mixing in. Beyond just having a better arrangement where you take out all the junk that just doesn't need to be there, that's just covering up all your great work. Let's look at what you can do specifically in the mix to not crowd the imaginary box. And I will say, I was very inspired by a great series of posts over at mixcoach.com. I think Stone and the guys were writing an article or two so far on demagnetizing your mix. And this is very much in line with that. Go read that for some more in-depth study on this. So if you read that, this is going to seem very similar, but they're spot on. And this is exactly how I think about mixing anyway. There's an imaginary box, okay? So look at my crude drawing. This blue box represents all the space audio-wise we have to shove our tracks in, okay, in your DAW. And then obviously you got your speakers on the left and the right. And the problem is a lot of our mixes sound like they just are trapped inside that blue box. Whereas a pro mix might sound like it's got stuff coming out the left and the right, top and bottom. It's exploding out of the speakers. It sounds less contained, more open, whatever kind of words you want to use. So the question is, how do we get our mix to sound bigger and to not be all contained inside this box? How do we get it to not be crowded in the box? And there's two main ways I want to show you. I'll do one in this video, and then I'll hit another one in part 2 next week. But let me show you what we're going to have to do to make this work, and we'll hit the first one today. The big thing is EQ will do a lot, right? So if you allow your low frequency content to dip below the box, if you use EQ in such a way that it makes your low frequency stuff, bass guitar, kick drum, really low fat synths, stuff like that, seem like it's coming from below the box, your mix can sound huge. We'll show you how to do that. Same thing with high frequency content. If there's a way that you can take certain elements, certain tracks in your mix that have a lot of high frequency content that's desirable and make that sound like it's just above the mix box, you'll get some separation there. Keeping in mind that not everything is going to be able to live below the box or above the box. Some things need to stay in the box. Some instruments and tracks have a lot of mid-frequency stuff, and they need to stay. The mids are going to stay there in the box. So it's not that you want to get everything out of the box. You just want to separate the lows and the highs from each other and from the mids. So that's sort of the vertical element where you feel the bass down low, you feel the soaring highs up top. It's all an illusion, but we're going to do that with EQ. And then the other is depth and width. So depth really comes from volume. You might think it comes from reverb and delays, and you can use those to create very specific types of depth, but you don't even have to use those to create depth. I've talked about this before. The volume of a track creates the illusion of depth. Things that are very low in volume seem farther away. They seem buried. Things that are higher in volume seem right up in your face. If you've ever thought of or heard of a mix where the vocal seems in your face, you're saying that it's closer to you. Dimensionally, three-dimensionally, that's volume, and you can use compression and things like that to increase the apparent volume, even if it's not getting louder. So volume equals the depth, which I can't really show you on a screen, inside and outside of the screen to get out of the box that way. And then, you guessed it, panning equals width. And you think panning would be easy, but for whatever reason, it seems like it's not that easy for people, or they only pan halfway. And I'll show you some of that today. So looking at volume and panning, you can get depth and width to get outside of the speakers, to get outside of the flat mixing box. For some things, not everything, okay? Again, remember, not everything's got to jump out of the box in those 3 dimensions. And then using some filters and EQ, we can get high frequency content and low frequency content to go above and below the box. This sounds maybe somewhat basic, or it sounds maybe somewhat, out there. But the concepts are simple, but when you think about mixing this way, how can I separate some things out of this box? You're gonna get much bigger mixes, okay? So let's flip back over to the DAW. Here I have a track, just raw, no plugins, of a song that I've recorded, and you may have heard this before. And this is a great example. When you already recorded a song, ideally your tracks are going to sound huge and larger than life, but flat up, no plugins, your fader's at 0. Generally, your mix is going to sound like something like this, where you hear everything and you go, oh, that's cool, but it's all crowded in the box. Yes, I know I'm already there. I'm already there. Yes, I know I'm already. Right? So everything is kind of in the middle. There is some panning. There's some things out hard left and right. The volumes aren't set perfectly. I can kind of hear things somewhat balanced. I try to record them well, that they were relatively balanced. But this is a great example of you're stuck in the box. And so what I want to do in this video today is use volume and pan to get some depth and some width where we haven't literally used any plugins yet, but we can already begin to separate some things outside of the box. Remember, not everything is going to get outside of the box. You need to leave things in the box. The box is perfectly fine, but it's how can we, with sort of some tricks and some voodoo magic, as it were, where it's really nothing crazy, but to the audience, they're going to think it's bigger than it is. How can we get some separation and give everything a play so that sounds like things are coming outside of the box? What I'm going to do is start with volume. I'm going to quickly run through on this little pass and just adjust the volume of things to move some things further back into the mix, and other things are going to stay up front in the mix. Okay, so we're going to work on depth. Yes, I know I'm already there. I'm already there. Yes, I know I'm already there. Yes, I know I'm already there. Yes, I right? Basic volume stuff here. And don't worry if my mix bus is clipping. I'm not really looking at that right now. I'm just trying to show you, you need to pull some things down. Not everything can be up top. I think we get that concept. Levels are huge, but I think we underestimate how powerful levels are. So we start to play with levels, pull things down, allow things to stay up top where they need to be. Not everything can be hot, not everything can be loud. The second thing we want to do is not get things out of the box left and right, width-wise. And this is where people get tripped up with panning. And panning is a very personal decision. It's part of the art, and every song calls for something different, and there's no right or wrong. But one of the easiest ways to get more separation is to simply not have everything panned in this beautiful little arc where you have some things at 37, some things at 50 to the left, some things hard left. I see this a lot. It's kind of like the rainbow effect, right? Everything's panned around and around. Everything's too close together that way relative to each other. You actually get more separation if you just pick 3 spots: left, center, and right. Hard left, up the middle, hard right. It's all an illusion. So it's called Lcr Panning, and I'm going to do that right here. I've got some things that either when we were tracking or we were playing with where they're kind of panned all around. And what I'm going to do is just go ahead and get the panning either up the middle, left, or right, and see if we can get some separation.
Yes, I know I am already there. I'm already there. Yes, I know I am already there. Yes, I know I am already there. Yes, I know I am already there. I'm already there. Yes, I know I am already
All right, very, very simple stuff. You saw me experimenting with the tambourine. Sometimes I like to pull them out left and right. If you don't like that, you can pull it up the middle. What do we do here? Really simple stuff. The main guitars are these guys. Let's pull it out here in the middle of the chorus. Right, they're hard left and right. But this other lead guitar part, the sort of octave part, instead of having that doubled left and right also, or kind of in between spots, just put it on the hard left or the hard right or somewhere where it can play and stick out as having some depth. As opposed to this. Even if you think that sounds more balanced, all we're doing is keeping things in the box, and it's just making the box more crowded. It's really, you're stepping on your feet. So you might as well pan things all the way out. And the same thing with the strings, you know? The strings I had nice and stereo, and listen to that on top of these guitars also. It's like a mess. So if you pan things hard left and right, pan the strings hard right, even though they're stereo, pan the 2 octave guitars hard left, see what we get. Way more width. Way more apparent width because you have things on the left that are different than the things on the right, tonally, rhythm-wise. And that's what triggers your mind to think that you have a very wide mix. And it's way more clarity, way more separation. It's just so much better. So all in all, you get some of that going, and our mix is starting to sound a lot better. Right? So this is a simple step in not crowding the box, right? If you think about the box again, we want to get stuff out of the middle and move it out towards the speakers. And we want some things to sit further deeper in the box, some things to be right on the edge of the box, right up at the edge of the screen in front of your face. And we do that with volume. We do the width with panning. And in the next video, we'll look at some simple filtering and EQ to separate the low frequency content from the high frequency content, from the mid frequency stuff, which is going to be most of what is in the mix, so that you get a little bit more height separation as well. And all of that combined is going to help you have a mix that has more apparent openness, more awe and wow factor, whatever you want to call it, as opposed to this crowded, contained, amateur sounding mix. Hope that helps. We'll see you on the next video.